Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Today, we're going to talk about trees and money and credits, okay? And climate. And I have two old friends here with me. Theri is one of a kind. Theri Reichlin is, both of them are forestry people. So I know them through our mutual interest in trees. And Theri is in Zurich, Switzerland, where she works for an outfit called Carbon Pool. And she is going to tell us about this whole thing about carbon credit marketing things, which I've never really explored. And her friend and my friend, Parag Kadam, is in South Carolina. He's doing a postdoc at Clemson University in forestry. And I knew them both 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago when they were students at the University of Toronto, and I was president of Science for Peace. And Theri was always somebody I could rely on to do things for me. And anyway, they both graduated and went on to higher degrees in various places. And then Theri worked, I think, largely planting trees. And as at least the part I remember was she was in Wales for a while, planting trees in schoolyards. But I think
That's right.
just part of her job. That wasn't your main job, was it, Theri?
It was a combination of things.
Yeah.
It was my entire, I guess, career has been around trees and forests. So I'm very privileged in that sense to have that.
So now both of them are in the money end of things, or the credit end of things, the business side. They know things about the way commercial interests intersect with our concern about the climate. And I think that's what I want to talk about today. So Parag, what's the name of your game?
So the last time we talked a couple of years ago, it was I started as a forest certification auditor before I started my PhD. After I finished my master's in Toronto. My research and my extension aspects were totally about forest certification, but also forest standardization through government, like other multi-stakeholder systems, and inclusion of industry at the same time. So after my PhD, now I've transitioned towards conservation programs, but with an economic angle. So, for example, I have been in the last couple of years, I've been working with the United States Department of Agriculture's Conservation Reserve Program, which is basically it allows marginal land to be set aside for conservation from private landowners in return for some money for them to implement conservation activities. So it removes the land from agricultural production to conservation, and then the farmers get some money out of in response to that, basically. So that economic aspect of what farmers' motivations are, what landowners' motivations are towards having non productive land into conservation, and then how the impacts of those programs like this happens on, for example, crop yield, or also on ecosystem services like water, soil, and carbon to that extent. And I've also been working with different projects in economics side of natural resource management, like for example biochar. What is the for example profitability of biochar projects for a small landowners? What kind of inputs that the private landowners would need to have so that they make profit, while because these products like biochar also provide ecosystem services, more conservation oriented, especially soil and water related services.
My ears always flap when I hear the word biochar.
Yeah.
I've been sort of a fanatic promoter of biochar for years and used to just talk about nothing but biochar
Yeah.
to all my friends. but it never worked.
Yeah.
I mean, I always thought, why aren't you guys producing biochar everywhere? And I guess the answer was there's no market for it, but maybe that's
changed.
Yeah.
That's changing right now, and I work with biochar as well, in
Yeah.
my capacity too. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, to Meta, just to go into a little bit more detail about the biochar work that I have done, we just had our paper published today, actually, early morning, about the biochar, the profitability of biochar, and what kind of things are required to make biochar actually marketable for private landowners here in the US South, Southeast to be specific. But those kind of, so the three things that we found was we need to have like cost of manufacturing to be down for biochar, which is an important thing because like if you use cost of manufacturing by these large boilers, like large paper mills, where these boilers actually make biochar, then it becomes a little bit cost effective. But if a single farmer, a single private landowner tries to go and manufacture biochar by themselves, which they can with rudimentary ovens or boilers kind of things, but the cost increases a lot, and which doesn't make it feasible for the private landowner to actually implement biochar harvesting. So the cost of manufacturing is one key criteria. Then we also have the government support that is needed. So here the USDA's NRCS, the Conservation Service arm that provides economic support for these kind of biochar projects, that has a limit, and like it's not enough right now. It is just enough, but if it goes below that, it's going to be non-profitable for the landowners again. And the third important factor was the carbon credit price, what Terry has also been working with in her capacity. So the carbon credit price cannot go below a certain limit for the landowners or private landowners basically to make profit out of any biochar project basically. So these three things have been key for marketability of biochar, at least like in the study that we did in the US South. Yeah.
okay. Well, now already I've got a concern.
Yeah.
I got into an argument with George Mondio. He gave a talk here in Toronto about how biochar was not a good idea because what was going to happen is that people would start planting trees just for biochar and cut them down, and that is a bad idea. You should plant trees for other good reasons. And I said, no, people wouldn't do that. People would collect cardboard boxes and, waste of various kinds. And we would have out in the local park, we would set up a pyrolyzer, and every Saturday I'd fill my little red wagon with trash and take it there, and somebody would help me make it into biochar.
Right.
And I would take home whatever had been pyrolyzed the week before and put it in the garden. I made this up, of course. And that's how I thought it would all work, that we would use things that would otherwise be waste products. But sounds like you're telling me that what's going on is exactly what the guy warned me against. Yeah. Okay. Tell me, is this a good idea, or is the overall effect of planting trees just to cut them down and make biochar a bad idea?
So biochar helps not only, so for example, if you're cutting down the trees that you're planting on biochar infused soils, then there is a need to have a more life cycle assessment of that whole process. But if the biochar, because biochar also sequesters carbon in soil, which is a major boost for soil productivity as well, and water retention as well. So these are added services which are not considered part of the economic calculations that people do, but it does have impact. So using biochar by itself is definitely helpful.
He didn't doubt that biochar is good for the environment, for the climate, for everybody, except the notion that it was not a good idea to plant trees and for the sake of making it into biochar, that I think we ought to make biochar from all of this waste that we produce.
Yeah, that's completely true. So, for example, the cost of manufacturing being low for the products that I was talking about just now is like, so the large paper mill boilers. What they do is they use the residue from all their manufacturing and other processes that happens, and then the residue, the byproducts of those systems go into making of biochar. So yes, like planting trees for biochar, if like there might be a possibility when I mentioned like the whole life cycle assessment, but that is a risk factor that we have to deal with, and we have to have better calculative like measures to actually ensure that, okay, if you're growing trees for the sake of biochar, then like does the whole cycle emit more carbon or less carbon? So but like I completely agree with you on the sense that yes, like using residues is the only way, the best way, without going towards that risk area. So yeah.
What you hope everybody does is just use stuff after in the manufacturing of boards and things and timber, take timber and make it into wood products.
Yeah.
That the stuff that's left over, the residue, the sawdust and the trash,
Yes.
chips and stuff can be made
Yes.
into biochar.
That's correct. Yeah.
All right, I'm with you there. I love the idea. But also let's go back to the time when you were doing your PhD, and this was about certification. Remind me how that worked. You were certifying certain forests as well managed and proper ones, and others you were giving them a grade or something. What was that all about?
So forest certification is a voluntary system of ensuring that forest companies like let's think about it in terms of like the chain of forest products, where they go from and like where they end up, right? They start from the land that is being managed, for like the forests on the land that are being managed are managed well. The products that come out of those forests need to be separated from all the products that come from non-certified products, forests, right? And then through the supply chain, they end up at the consumer. So what forest certification does is basically you certify the land according to some standards. Now these standards are made by multi-stakeholder systems like Forest Stewardship Council, or here in North America, Sustainable Forestry Initiative, SFI, which is more prominent basically. So these these multi-stakeholder organizations, they create standards based upon stakeholder inputs, and these stakeholders come from environmental, like industrial and civil societies, NGO groups as well. So these standards, if the forest owner or the company that owns the forest land wants to get certified towards this standard, then they would have to follow these standards. And then the auditor goes and checks, okay, like have they actually followed those standards? Are they in conformance or they are in non-conformance basically? Now this the demand for forest certification for these companies comes from the end of this chain that we talked about, the consumers. If the consumers are aware, if the consumers demand, or if they, or even if they can pay extra premium for the products that will be certified in the markets, then there is a demand for this forest certification, which the forest companies would have to follow. But this is not the case, for example, in like developing countries like India, where I come from, like where most of the certified products go to Europe, or to North America from that part of the world, basically. So there are two, three components that are essential.
Sorry, but hold on. You're saying that India does have a system of certification, but the products go to Europe, not North America.
Oh, so like the products go to developed countries. This is what I meant. From these developing countries where these
but they do have certification in India.
Yes,
In other words,
that's
every country now
that's
has,
correct.
or many countries have certification projects. Is that right?
When I mentioned the forest certifications are as being voluntary, they are also multinational systems of organization. So FSC and SFI, these large certification schemes or programs that we call, they go across countries. And so, for example, if a land in India is certified against forest management standard, the products that come out of that will be sold in markets which would be majority of European and North American markets, basically. So the products are not used domestically because there is no demand for those products in India. But yes, on the ground, on the forest land level, the companies even in India, they would have to follow the same standards that the companies, for example, in Europe, who are getting certified to those standards are being this thing. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, now tell me a bit about what you look for when you're certifying. What are the criteria that you want these companies to meet if
Right.
we give them a good rating?
Right. So for example, if there is one standard for forest land management and one standard for procuring products from certain lands. So these are two separate standards. So and nowadays people have started using the standards have started using risk-based approaches. So for the land being managed, yes, what are the ecosystem services being potentially harmed by the operations of a company, and how are they mitigating those risks? Based upon that, you have to have like each standard, like FSC standard is different, SFI standards are different, and so what is the company doing to mitigate these risks? And then what is the company doing to add value to the existing land and land services that are present on their listing? And then when sourcing, the standards require which areas are you sourcing. They do not source from land that is ecologically sensitive, has high conservation value forests. Those are the ecological aspects. Then there are social aspects. What kind of things, same in the same risk based approach, what are the social harms that might be like associated with the operations of a company on the land or sourcing or even through the supply chains, including the actual people who are living on the land or associated with the land, who are actually employed within the company, and then how are the like those people affected by the operations of their company as well. So the policies of the
So you're
company.
even looking at the well-being of the employees?
That's correct. Like even including the well-being, the actual financial remunerations in.
Okay. And when you were doing that, you would actually go out and look at forests, or how? If you're going to certify
Going on site, right?
a forest, you have
Yeah.
to go have a look at it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, definitely, for sure. Like before started my PhD, I was working for 1.5 years in New Delhi in India. So the certification body that we were working with was responsible for operations and clients, basically in the South Asia and Middle East, basically.
Okay.
So yeah, that's
All
correct.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I want to talk to Terry. I'll come back to what you're doing now, this conservation thing.
Yeah.
But that I think sounds like I could understand that. We don't need a lot of explanation for that, logically at any rate. But Terry, you're doing this carbon credit marketing thing. So
Yeah. So
explain all of that, and then I want to know how it connects with what he does. Go ahead.
all right. That's a really good question. So I'm in carbon credit insurance, and specifically the nature-based carbon credits. Now, I think Parag has touched on stuff on how carbon credits are, on a little bit about it, but I think I could maybe go back into the basics so we can get like an overall, a baseline for the viewership to kind of have an understanding. But essentially, carbon credits are basically units of carbon, so 1 ton of carbon that have been extracted from the atmosphere, and that is for reasons because there's lots of large companies that emit carbon and countries that emit carbon, and essentially with climate change and the actions, climate climate actions, they want to like extract all the carbon that's been taken, that's been emitted. They want to take it back out of the atmosphere, right? So they do that with several different, I guess, mechanisms, you would say. There's, technological, so you have your direct air capture, then you have your nature-based solutions, and that is essentially, if you go really back to basics, like trees, growing and then sucking up carbon out of the atmosphere as they do so. So that is essentially what people are paying for, and that came mostly from the you get your science community and your consumer, and everyone wants to buy um, you know you know carbon friendly or like climate friendly products, or it's just like certified products and stuff like that. That all comes from the demand of the populace, right?
Mhm.
So as Parag was talking about, consumers wanting better kind of more eco-friendly products, like I just looked at my tissue box, and like sorry, it's blurred, but there's a logo here which says, hey, this is coming from a certified forest. So the awareness of the population is kind of what is driving it. And you have huge companies, your major technological companies, which are emitting a lot, right? But they're also trying to be net zero, and trying to basically be palatable for the consumer. So therefore, they're buying all of these carbon credits. So essentially, where I guess my work comes in, carbon credits, the entire sector is in its infancy right now. But many, I
Why?
guess,
Because this is not
sorry?
new. It's been going on for 10, 12 years, hasn't it?
Yeah, so it's still new in a sense that like there's a lot of crooks in the sector trying to find loopholes, and there's been a lot of scandalous kind of
Mhm.
instances around this where you have, yeah, just people trying to find ways to make some extra money off of Mother Nature, right?
Mhm.
So it's in that sense, it's still very underdeveloped. It's not regulated. There's no like one kind of thing that sets all the rules, and many, I guess, people or organizations or whatever are finding ways to abuse the system for extra cash, right? And yeah, so that's been basically happening. Yeah, there's a couple of there's a couple of, I guess, occurrences where you can even read on the news where people have been enrolled into carbon credits without even knowing that their land has been enrolled into these credits, and so on.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's a lot of issues with this because it's an unregulated industry at the moment. There are kind of problems with that. It's like the Wild West, right? They call these guys carbon cowboys, is the name for people that are abusing the carbon credit system, I guess, to get some extra cash without really having necessarily any sort of uh, you know verification in place, or such things. Now, so a lot of kind of stakeholders in the game have picked up on this, right? So what happens when you go out and you decide that you want to use a plot of land to generate carbon credits by growing trees, right? A lot of the times you need investment, right? Not everybody has the money to just put into tree planting and just leave it there, right? A lot of people expect a return on this kind of funding, on this money that they put in. So that's kind of what has been like the major roadblock in terms of making this more widespread, is because the funding might be there, but people don't know how to implement it properly, and there is no kind of security on, okay, well, if I do plant 10,000 hectares of land with trees, like, will I get anything back, right? And I think the human element of this, the economic element has a lot to do with how the world is today, but it also is affecting how the carbon world is as well.
Let me back up
Yeah.
and see if I understand it. Okay. The only experience I've had with anything like offsetting emissions, which is, I guess, the name of the game, right?
Mhm.
Offsetting emissions of greenhouse gas.
That's right.
Was when I flew I took a flight once that said, "Would you like to contribute to a fund that would offset the emissions that are going to be caused by your trip?"
Mhm.
And I said, "Sure." So that added on to my plane ticket.
Right. Yeah, of
And
course.
now I want to assume that what will happen is that money is collected, and what happens? You go find a person with some empty land who wants to maybe raise trees and suck carbon out of the atmosphere, and you pay them, or do you simply, how does the money help them make a living by doing this that they wouldn't otherwise get?
Mhm. So yeah, so in essence, you're right. Landowners have, they have their land and they use it for different things, right? Whether it's producing crops or producing timber. So you kind of have to consider, okay, well, am I going to be paying this farmer more if he were to get carbon credits versus if he was planting, corn or whatever? And that's, I think, the whole conversation that Parag and I are going to have around, like the different uses and how, how there needs to be some kind of ethical, just I think baseline around like what can and what should be done essentially, right, for conservation and for social value.
Mhm.
But I think I'm getting a bit too complicated. So essentially, if you were a project, so they call them project developers, right? And essentially, this would be an entity that would either go out and rent land or buy it, and then plant it with different kinds of trees, trees in order to then say, okay, well, I've planted this much and I'm going to sequester this much carbon from the atmosphere. And this is how much the carbon is going to, this is the value of the carbon, right? So then a company like, let's say, I don't know, well, just give me a huge company. Let's say Unilever or someone, they go and say, okay, well, I want to offset 100, I want to offset 100 credits. I want to offset 100 tons of carbon. And I'm going to go to this developer and I'm going to buy it from them, basically, right? So that's how it works. And then the
Now,
buyer,
Unilever
I,
itself would buy, I think that's a soap company or something, would buy some land and manage the forests, or
no. So
oh,
they would, so essentially how these things, I guess, work, they wouldn't buy it directly or they wouldn't manage their forest directly. They would buy it from a project developer, right?
and that is a company that is
That is
really
a company.
a company that it would be. Now, there's also such a thing as carbon trading, and the value, I mean, it's a market. So
It
the
is, it is.
credit can vary according to supply and demand, or whatever market, runs on. I think it's always supply and demand, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how bring in the question of the value of the credit.
So I've seen credits. I mean, there's different types of like, I guess, methodologies that you can use to achieve these carbon credits, right? There's credits that are based on RED, which is basically conserving forests as if you weren't, as if you were going to cut them down, but you're not going to, which I think honestly is just not a great way to do things. There's other projects which are, you take a bare plot of land and you plant trees on it, and then you can definitely say, okay, well, these have certainly emitted, these have certainly sequestered some of these emissions, right? So you can see from 0 to 100, like something definitely happened here. And there's also just different ways to manage your project in order to kind of sequester or prevent emissions.
Okay, now let me make sure.
Yeah.
A credit is
Mhm.
a unit of measurement of how
Yeah.
much
Of 1 ton.
carbon is a 1 ton.
That's
1
right.
ton of carbon has been sequestered per credit.
So one credit is for basically, it's a certificate for like 1 ton that has been.
Now,
Um,
who decides this?
now,
Would Parag ever go out and look at a piece of land and say, "It looks to me like you get 3 credits for this plot of land with what you're planting there"? Or How
So
does this all work?
okay, so so I work mainly in the voluntary carbon market, which is basically not run by any kind of government, and it's companies are buying these credits in order to kind of please their consumers and make them satisfied with how they are running. But essentially, you have bodies that are called registries, and those are your big four are like Vera and Gold Standard, ACR and CAR. So there's a bunch of different companies which say, okay, we're going to, certify these carbon credits, and we're going to, provide like a list of them online, so you can have like anybody can look at these things, right? You can basically go onto the Vera website and look for any kind of project, and like there's a bunch of different documentation, which most of them should be made public, right? So these registries, they decide, okay, well, this project is in accordance with our standard, with our methodologies, and then they are going to or they have been sequestering this much carbon over the last, I don't know, 2, 3, or 5 years,
Mhm.
right? And then this carbon that has been verified can be bought by a buyer on the voluntary carbon market.
Mhm.
So,
Okay, now let me
yeah.
go, because there are national parks, for example, that are full of trees. Those
Mhm.
guys are not on the market, right? So
That's right. So,
presumably a project for credit would be one that is going to sequester carbon that would not otherwise be sequestered. So
exactly.
you're going to do some additional
Yeah.
sequestering and get paid for or get some
Yeah.
benefit for doing that, right?
That's right. That's exactly how it works, and that is one of the three, I guess, main pillars of these, of the validity of these credits. Right? There's this concept called additionality, and that is basically, without this carbon financing, would this sequestration have happened? Right? And that's one of the three prongs. That's one of the three kind of things you look at when you are assessing. When Parag would be assessing a carbon project, or when I would be assessing a carbon project, is saying, okay, well, if you look at this land, would this have been, growing forests anyway, right? If the money wasn't there, and if you look at, if you look at a bunch of different like national parks, they're there and they were going to be there, right? So you can't really enroll these into credits, and there are really strict rules about that with each of these registries, which basically state, okay, well, this land is not eligible for receiving credits because it already has been, sequestering carbon on its own anyway. So
Mhm.
that's essentially what should be in the ideal world happening. But we also have seen over the last decade, carbon cowboys, and their shenanigans across the sector, saying, okay, well, this land in Africa has been, people are protecting it and growing stuff on it, and therefore, gets so much funding. But really, the people that are on the land actually have, no clue that that's actually, that they're even being talked about, or that their own land is in a
Yeah,
transaction.
yeah.
So the
And that,
additionality is a
of course,
pretty
would be the
strong.
first thing that would occur to me is,
Of course.
how do you know that this wouldn't have happened anyway? That this conservation that you're doing, or the sequestering that you're going to be giving credit for, how do you know that it wouldn't have happened anyway? That would have been, and what you're saying is, when there's scandal, that's one of the ways of creating a scandal, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And ideally, projects would get up and running without the scandal ever happening, without, because, there would be no grounds for scandal at all. So
Mm.
essentially, when these verifiers, when these registries are, um, verifying all these projects, they have to look at, is it additional? Is the baseline? Does the baseline make sense? And so on. So that's kind of a major thing around in the credit world right now, right? And it's harder to prove additionality in projects which are already kind of growing trees on its own, but then there's kind of concepts which you can talk about as, let's say, improved forest management, where you take a forest and you do some things to it in order for it to grow faster. And then the delta between what would have been there and what you actually get because of your management, that can sometimes be used for credits. But these things are, yeah, they're hard to calculate, right? Because at the end of the day, like, you still need to go out and like measure trees with your tape and then do some modeling on the computer. So there's a lot of math that goes into it, and there's a lot of predictions as well, right? So some people, when they were like, getting investments and trying to sell credits ahead of time, they're like, oh, well, my forest is going to generate 100,000 of these carbon credits, right? And then in the end, they end up with like, 75. So it's also this conversation of, okay, well, what is predicted versus what actually happens, right? And we can't really tell what happens until we get there, right? So this is a long-term game, and in forestry, as Parag knows as well, like, it's everything in this sector is a long-term gain. And I think the current market and population and just the general way that we operate in like this fast-moving society is on a short-term kind of spectrum. So it's very difficult to kind of take a step back and say, okay, well, this is going to take at least 30 years for it to actually make any kind of sense.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
now Parag, did you this certification thing you do or did? I think you're not doing that now. Does this connect with the verification of the claims that people would be making when they apply to get recognized as a carbon credit? Is there any connection between certification as in terms of what you've been doing,
right.
about forest management and so on, and what Theri's been describing?
Yes, definitely there is, and it's growing by the day. So the like I had mentioned FSC and SFI as forest certification standards, which are major ones on the global level, right? There's another one called Sustainable Biomass Program (SBP), which directly deals with the carbon cycling, carbon calculations at each stage of the project that is being certified for or certified against. Now, FSC has also started. They are still in stakeholder consultation phase, but they have
What
started.
is FSC again?
It's Forest Stewardship Council. It started in 1992 when the Rio de Janeiro conference happened, when all the environmentalists and social NGOs that came together. Okay, we need a standardization of forestry practices on the global level, which can
And
be
that
applied on the
is
local level.
worldwide. This
Yes.
FSC is an international outfit, right?
Yes. They operate in about more than 100 countries now. When I did my study on the impacts of FSC on biodiversity, that in 2021, like about 91 countries we had the data for, but they have also updated their data management systems as well. So these forest certification systems are going towards carbon related ecosystems, service related accounting of the projects or the lands that are being certified for sure, and they're now connecting these standards to the credits that can be generated through the system basically. So that is happening from my side. So there are two different things. These forest certifications, SBP included, they are still like different standards compared to the registries that Terry was talking about. Just party would be the only one.
You yourself, when you were in that business, that end
Yeah.
of the business, you would actually go out, spend a certain amount of time in the field.
Yes.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
It
Now,
was
Theri,
amazing because you had to deal with, for example, not just the companies that are being certified, but the people that are employed. Like, for example, in India, especially, there are seasonal laborers that don't just work for one company. The first for one season, they might work for this company. The other season, they might move on to other. So, talking with these people, because you have to interview at all levels of the operations of the company, people and the environment, basically. So, yeah, that was an amazing job, and I want
hey,
to try to go
Theri,
back.
do you ever do that?
So not yet. I am in so I think when I go back into if I can take another step back into what I'm doing or where I'm sitting in this whole carbon game, is that when you go for when you go ask for funding to develop a project, a lot of these times the banks will say no. Like, what are we going to get out of it, right? There's no guarantee of you returning any of this money. So there's now this concept called carbon credit insurance, where if your project fails for a reason, let's say fire or flooding, or any sort of natural catastrophe, in my case, then you would basically get the credits that you were meant to get back, essentially from the insurance company. So in this capacity, as an insurer, you kind of need to know what is going to happen, right? And whether, like, once financial, I guess organizations get involved, things will be a little bit more rigid, and the verification process will be also on our side, right? We can't just take someone else's word blindly, because it's our money's on the line, right? Our business is on the line as well. So essentially, once we start insuring projects, we will probably need to go out on site and also have a look at, is this land actually being used for credits, right? Are the methods they're using great? Are they planting the trees properly, for example, right? In my previous job, I went out in a different capacity, but as a forester, and I saw a bunch of trees being planted upside down, for example, right? Which is like, it's crazy. People that really don't know much about this stuff are doing all these big projects, and so
Clearly, anybody would know the roots of a tree from the branches. It reminds me of of something. I used to know people who had been conscientious objectors in one of the wars. They wouldn't be drafted. And so they were put in camps to do labor, and tree planting was one of the activities assigned to them. But I knew a guy who'd been through that, and he said, well, we knew that these trees were not going to live anyway. They were just giving us this work to do because they had to make us do something. So we planted them upside down.
Oh my goodness.
But of course, he knew what side of a tree was up from down. What's the explanation for what you found, where people were didn't they know any better, or what was the matter?
I honestly, that was 8 years ago. I was an intern working in a smaller forestry business, but I did see like trees that, like, you don't see the whole thing, right? You don't see the entire forest not, having, trees either not planted, they're just like put there, laid there, not like, you don't make a hole and then put the thing in there, or just like upside, or like whatever. It could have been multitude of reasons, right? Somebody in a rush, or some guy that was just there because he was on his last day and didn't care, right? Like it's a bunch of different reasons. It all comes down to the fact that forestry is about people, and that's like in every stages of the cycle of the forest, it's still mostly about people. The conversations are about people, at the start, like we're having right now, or at the end. Yeah. Every stage of the forest has people involved in it. But yeah, this could have been anything.
Right now, Newfoundland is burning.
Yeah.
Is there going? I mean, presumably that is of great interest to the insurance company, because that's where the rubber hits the road, isn't it? You guys have to make good on some kind of financial commitment to people who own a lot of trees in Newfoundland, or
absolutely. So yes, if a project insures with a company and the forest would burn down, for example, then we would have to pay out. That's essentially
and how this is happening so widely now.
It is.
I mean, is it worse than you predicted, or did the forestry industry know all along that with global warming, a lot of these forests are going to be lost?
That's a really good question. I don't think we can talk about like a degree to which we could have predicted it, right? Nobody can predict that.
But that's what the industry is. You're making
of course.
The industry is guessing how many trees are going to burn down.
That's right. So up until now, like up until I guess the insurance is coming into play in the carbon sector, essentially, you did have forest managers kind of knowing, okay, well, this I might lose this much of my crop, right? And they account for it in that sense. But what I have seen is in a lot of these, like, inexperienced project developers and registries that don't really have I guess you can't really, yeah, they don't have like a method to tell you, okay, well, in your area, this is generally how much will be lost over time, because there isn't enough data to kind of tell, okay, well, in this portion of South America, generally, if a project happens, it will tend to lose between 12 and 15% of its forest to fire, right? Because the industry is so new, we don't have that much data in that sense. What we do have is modeling, and we have an ability to take remote sensing and, let's say satellites which detect fires, and take those, put them into the computer, and for it to do a calculation to say, okay, well, these are the fires that have been happening here over the last, I don't know, 10, 20 years. And based on that, we're going to see this many fires in the next 10 years. So that is basically using satellite data in order to kind of predict, okay, well, this is what the chances of these fires occurring. And then you can price that into your premium. So let's say, because you are in a region which is very risky, right, for insurance, you're going to have to pay a little bit more in order to, in order for us to insure you, right?
Yeah.
There's another thing which also, you can also have, fire mitigation in your project, right? As a part of your project, you'll have a section and it's saying, okay, well, I'm going to do this, this, and this in order to mitigate any kind of chances of fires occurring.
There really are things that you can do that will significantly reduce the likelihood of a forest fire?
So yes, and we have a really good forest fire professor at the faculty. He is also retired. He's been there for ages. So I think
Martell?
that's right. That's right. Dave
Yes.
Martell. He's a superstar.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine.
Yeah, so you should invite him on your show at
he's
some point.
Shy or something.
Anyways, we both study with him. So I hope we make him proud. I think.
Let me go to Parag, because I want to cover this conservation thing too a little, which is what you're doing now, right?
Yeah.
Parag, tell me, who has the initiative in deciding about conservation? The idea is you're going to pay people to not do something that they would otherwise do. And so who decides what piece of land should be reserved that way or protected from some kind of action? Is it the owner of the land? Is it the government? Is the EPA? And by the way, politics enters into a lot of this, I would think, especially when you've got, the Trump administration going around making it difficult for any kind of people working on reducing climate change.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about the interests involved and how the whole thing works.
Right. So the first motivation needs to come from the landowner or the land operator. So these are the two required classes to actually apply for this conservation reserve program that I was talking about. There are other easement or conservation set-asides kind of programs, but the conservation reserve program has been the largest in the United States, especially. So the thing is, like, the landowner or the operator would say, okay, I want to be paid for not having my land under production. Like, I don't want to, so I want to put this land for conservation, but I want to get some money out of it. Now, the conservation reserve program, there are three types of enrollments basically. One, general enrollment, that every year, once in a year, they get to apply. And then through competitive, they're called EBIs. They're the ecosystem benefits indexes basically. So how much marginal or sensitive is your land? You will get more points if you want to put that aside for conservation. So based upon different criteria like this, they will get different points, and the higher the points that you have, that is also based upon competitive basis. The higher points you have, the better like chances that you will get accepted into this program.
Government does, there's no agency in the government that goes around and says, we want to save these trees. So I'm going to go talk to the farmer and see if we can get him to, or her to agree to this conservation. There's nothing like that happening. It's a competitive thing among farmers who want income for not doing something.
That's correct. That's the general CRP, but there are like continuous CRP and grassland CRPs. There are two other separate classes where a lot more, like there's higher emphasis on, okay, you will get paid, like for example $100 an acre, as opposed to in general you might get like $30 or $40 an acre rental rate. So like you have the really sensitive environmental land, then the government will pay you more basically in a separate
Okay, now clearly the amount of land that you're going to get conserved, if it is competitive, and there are a lot of farmers that want to do this, then the question of how much money the government allocates for the whole U.S. per year for this kind of thing will determine how much forest is going to be saved or preserved, right?
That's correct. So each farm bill that comes out, so 2025 is the year that the new farm bill will come in. 2021, like each 4 years, this farm bill comes in from the United States government, and then these farm bills have allocations of funds and the cap as well. Like for example, out of 30%, out of the whole land available for agriculture, you can conserve, you can set these production lands maybe like 27%. That was the cutoff line for 2024 basically. So you cannot enroll more land from these private landowners, this is the government saying, more than this percentage, for example, and that's cap is set aside for each year basically. But the funding comes from each farm bill.
Well, now, do you feel that the U.S. is budgeting enough, or maybe too much? I suppose logically it could be that they're conserving more land than they need to. But I would imagine that the question is, are they budgeting enough money to conserve as much forest as you think would be optimum for as somebody concerned about climate change?
Yes. So the state answer would be no, but you can see from 1985 when this program started under Ronald Reagan, actually he was Republican, like this, the funding has been large till 2007 basically, and the enrollment in these programs, it peaked in 2007, but after the economic the crisis of 2008, the kind of like the downturn that has been from allocation of funds from the government, as well as the enrollment of the percentage of enrollment of the private landowners and farmers into this program has gone down significantly, and it's still like in the last 2, 3, 4 years it has picked up again since 2021.
Is that because of Trump or what?
No, it's general. So economic environment that was there. Like in 2008, people didn't want to be like they wanted to have land in production more than having set aside. There's this risk aspect again that comes into this field where okay, I don't have enough money or like assurance of what is going to happen in the next few years. So okay, let's just like for myself, I'll put things that I can do to make money into practice instead of setting the land aside for conservation in that sense. So the same thing applies for the government allocation of funds as well. Like how much money do you have to allocate to this program which sets aside land away from for production? So there's this balance between the food security, but food security in a cynical way, because food security, like US produces a lot of, for example, corn and stuff like which we don't need to talk about food security towards that. But then the level of food that is like being produced basically versus the land that is being conserved, there has to be this balance between the two, and that is where the crux of these programs come into.
Well, do you feel frustrated or satisfied, both of you? Do you feel that what you're doing is working reasonably well, and or that you're frustrated because you can't do as much as you should? And you only have 3 sentences apiece because it's time to end this.
So I think like the situation could be way better than it is, especially for the marginalized or underserved landowners, the African American landowners, as well as the female landowners whose percentage is actually increasing now in the current area. So that definitely needs to have more targeted approach towards which landowners are you being like recruited into the
That's your
system.
3 sentences. Up.
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
3 sentences are up. Okay, Terry, take 3 sentences and then I got to close this.
All right. So I think I'm very hopeful about what I'm doing personally because I am increasing the integrity of the projects which are going to then, you know, be implemented. And hopefully by that, by doing so, these standards and the rigidity of the carbon world will strengthen, and there will be better quality stuff out there. That's essentially
Bless you.
what I'm
Wonderful. Love
Cool.
you both, and I'm
Love you
so
too.
glad to learn a
Thank
little
you,
bit about
Kadam.
what you've been doing because it sounds, you're my friends. You're doing the right thing. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Fun. So
Thank you very much
everyone,
for having us, Meta. It was amazing to talk, catch up.